Morning. Very pleased to be here today on a number of fronts. As many of you know who follow State House politics for the past 3 years, we've had several issues come before the General Assembly in regard to spending, in regard to growing entitlements, in regard to rejecting the federal stimulus, in regard to protecting life, in regard to conservative values that the Republican Party is centered upon. And time again in the Senate, as most of you State House observers know, a lot of times Republicans don't always hew to that line. A lot of times Republicans go to the other side and they'll vote against entitlements, or against increasing entitlements, and against increasing taxes, and against protecting life and for corporate welfare. But in the time that I've been up here for 3 years, there have been 3 staunch supporters for fiscal and social conservatism. People that I've learned from, that I consider my friends, my allies, people that I go to when I have questions about legislation. And it's with great pride today that those 3 conservative senators are going to be standing up and announcing their support for Dr. Ron Paul of Texas for the President of the United States, because he reflects my values and their values on the national stage. And I'm going to let each of them explain to you their own reasons, but I'm extremely proud to have these 3 gentlemen behind me. And it says volume for the candidacy of Dr. Paul that the most conservative senators in the state Senate, at a time when it counts, when people are watching and when people are deciding who they want to be the next President of the United States, they decided to line up and put their support behind Dr. Paul. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my good friend, Senator Danny Burton, the senator from Lawrence.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. I am Danny Burton. I represent Lawrence and Greenville counties in the state Senate. And it's been a real privilege for 12 years to represent my constituency. And I try to be as sympathetic, empathetic, and in touch with my constituency as possible. In 14 months, I've had numerous constituents urging upon me the support, the endorsement of all of the candidates that are still in the field, or even some that have dropped out at this point. So for 14 months or more, I've been standing on the sidelines. But for more than 14 years, yea, probably 28 to 30 years, I've been an observer of Dr. Ron Paul in his public career. I've never known a man in public service or in the public arena that has a message, that has had a message that resonated in my heart more than Dr. Ron Paul as it relates to preserving, promoting, defending the constitutional republic we hold dear, the United States of America. I've never known of a man that resonated, his message resonated with mine, my heart, more so than Dr. Ron Paul. So we're here on the cusp of the election, a few days away. And as I contemplated what I might say to my children and my grandchildren in years to come, when time was of an essence to take a change back in the right direction for this country, what did you do? Did you step out? And I can't do anything other at this point than say to my family, my friends, my neighbors, my constituents, to anyone that is keenly interested in the welfare of this country, Dr. Ron Paul, more than any other candidate in this Republican field, has the vision, the courage, and the convictions to take the steps necessary to put this country back on track. And I'll just close with this. I really believe, and there's so much talk about fiscal conservatism, social conservatism. I'll say this. I'll say that the fiscal duress, the fiscal crisis this country faces is the #1 social issue facing our families in this country. Their health, their welfare is at stake. And unless we put this country back on sound financial footing, unless we honor our obligations to really a constitutional republic, there is a declining fortune for those that come behind us. I can't stand that thought. And for that reason, I'm willing to go shoulder to shoulder with Dr. Ron Paul in the final days of this South Carolina primary and then on beyond for the sake of the country. And I'm very, very thankful to have the opportunity to step out and say, let's do this for America. Thank you very much. Senator Lee Bright from Spartanburg.
I want to stand here before you and tell you that a lot of times in life, there's a smart thing to do and there's the right thing to do. When you're an elected official, getting involved in these primaries is dangerous politically. I have heard a lot of grief because I've got friends in every camp. But I've got to tell you that I cannot stand on the sideline when I know that there's one man that is going to stand and fight for the Constitution. A lot of these other folks are conservative in certain areas, but Dr. Ron Paul is conservative in all areas. He stands firm, and what he says he believes. He's not going to say, well, if I'm in Texas, I need to do one thing, but if I'm somewhere else, I need to do something entirely differently. He's going to stand with his core convictions every time, everywhere. And I'm just proud to stand here with Dr. Ron Paul today. We have these flags, a lot of the senators have these flags on their desk for liberty, for our state, and you know, I've got to say that when it comes time to make a stand, you've got to do it. And I'm just asking South Carolinians to go past the 30-second media sound bites and pay attention to what Dr. Paul is saying, because he is standing by the Constitution. Men fought, bled, and died for the freedom of this country. And I just appreciate Dr. Paul and all he's doing. And I know Kevin Bryant has a few words, but I just cannot be a hypocrite and stand in this chamber and talk about the rights of states and not stand firm with a man who is standing with the Constitution and won't give rights back to those states that we deserve, that we're entitled to, and that we should fight for. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Bryant, and I represent the good people of Anderson County in the South Carolina Senate. Some will view some of these issues as extreme. Well, remember our hero Barry Goldwater said, extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice. Let's talk about extremism. If you quote anything you hear this morning, I want you to print this one very important number. We talk about $17 trillion of debt, and that's huge. That's a number that I can't even fathom in my mind. Well, let's talk about the unfunded liabilities of our federal government. You know what that is? $117 trillion. $117 trillion. This is an extreme problem, and it's going to take extreme solutions to deal with a $117 trillion problem. For the sake of our children and grandchildren, please listen to the issues that Dr. Paul is talking about. We're going to have to do some extreme things to turn this ship around. Thank you for your attention, and I appreciate the coverage of our friends in the media. And at this time, I will turn it over to the man that I'm going to vote for Saturday, and that's Congressman Ron Paul.
Thank you very much. Appreciate everybody coming out. I especially appreciate these 4 senators coming out and speaking out. It's a real honor, and I'm humbled by their support. And it was mentioned about social conservatives and economic conservatives. And sometimes when we have these debates, they seem to want to divide us up and say, are you a social conservative but not an economic conservative? I think if you're a conservative and believe in limited government and believe in the Constitution, you would be conservative in both areas. You know, it's very clear that our country was based on life, liberty, and property. And if life is important, all life is important. I believe life is important. I believe that there is a responsibility to protect all life, and that the states do have a major responsibility in protecting the unborn. But there's the liberty issue is one that we live by, and many of our founders of this country died for it, because it is truly liberty that produces the great wealth of a country. And if you understand that, of course, then you understand what property is all about. Because if you understand liberty, it is your right to live your life as you choose and to earn your living. But it follows that you ought to have a right to keep what you earn, which creates the incentive system. And under those conditions, you have the best distribution of property, you have the greatest amount of production, you have the largest middle class. And I think that we as conservatives and constitutionalists over the many decades that I've been doing this, we have generally come up short in selling our ideas, because the other side will say, well, we're the ones who care. We're the ideologues and we care for people. So what we want to do is use force. Take some property from one person and give it to another so there's more equality. Well, in one way, they do achieve the equality, but they usually achieve equality by creating more poverty. But in a free society, there's greater wealth, it's a better distribution, and that, of course, should be our goal. And, of course, individual liberty protects all those liberties, our religious liberties, our right to raise our children, and these are all very important issues. But fiscally, we are in a big mess, and it's not a national issue right now because it's a global issue, because we are in a global economy. What we're facing today is different than anything that we have ever faced before in all of history. And all the currencies are inflated. They're all deeply in debt. Our government is deeply in debt with our national debt as well as the entitlement commitment. And it cannot last. You just can't bail out everybody and keep printing money and solve our problem. I saw a statistic just the other day that is sort of a bit frightening, but it sort of tells you the story. If you take all the households in the country, more households receive from the government than those who send in to the government. So how can that be sustained? Of course it can't be. And that is the reason governments borrow and they tax, and then there's a limit, and then they have to resort to just printing money, which is devastating, and the crisis that is pending has a lot to do with our monetary system. But I am very much honored to be here, and four senators that have endorsed the campaign. They've endorsed the cause of liberty. They understand the issues. They understand the real danger of spending, and they understand the difference between this so-called issue that we who spend money and run up debts care about the poor. They understand the difference, that it's the people who create wealth, and you can take care of the poor much better than if you believe that the federal government is going to take care of us from cradle to grave. So once again, I am very pleased, and I thank them for coming forward, and it represents another shot in the arm for the campaign. The campaign has been doing very, very well. We did very well in Iowa. We did well in New Hampshire, and it looks like with the momentum that is building now, many people now are writing in the newspapers, and that's showing that it is a two-man race, and there's two individuals now that can lead. We do know who's actually in charge, but that doesn't mean things can't change. So we have become more optimistic, and with days like this and these endorsements, I become more optimistic as well. Thank you very much, and I'll take some questions.
Congressman, you have a number of South Carolina legislators who have a reputation of being on the outside of their leadership path in this state. You are on the outside often of the leadership path in Congress. How do you, from the outside, make positive change as your party's nominee and as president, if that's the will of the people? Next year being that outside.
Yeah, have the outside become the inside. They've already been elected in 4 Senate races, which means they didn't just get up and say, I'm going to be a senator. They got endorsement from the people. So I can't believe that the people that elected these 4 senators are on the outside. Yeah, there may be a transition going on philosophy, and we all recognize this, that the economic philosophy of this country has been very negative for 70 or 80 years because they believed in a planned economy, interventionism, and a lot of subsidies and the government mischief and the inflation. So we're shifting now, but this is where we're making great strides. So we don't win over the insiders by becoming like an insider. We win the inside over by making the outsiders become more appropriate. I think that's where we're making magnificent gains, because the numbers are growing, and looking at this philosophy of liberty. And the 4 of us, the 5 of us, we didn't invent this. We just know what our traditions are and what the Constitution says. And I think the American people are now looking at this more carefully because they need to, because for a long while we were able to coast because we were so wealthy and we could borrow money. But today, all that we see in appearance has been based on debt. And that is the reason our message is becoming more appropriate.
If I may follow up, there was a lot of outsider interest brought to bear in last year's election, in the 2010 election, excuse me. And there ended up being a lot of gridlock that came out of that.
Well,
why wouldn't 2012 result in gridlock chapter 2?
It depends on how fast the transition occurs, because we're not a group that says, well, what we have to do is give up half our philosophy in order to get something done. What we want to do is bring people together. You know, so I suggested at times that I'd like to separate economic conservatives and social conservatives. Bring people together. We talk about a different type of foreign policy. We can bring people together this way. And individual liberty brings people together. So if freedom is a unifying effort, and the Constitution is a unifying effort, we don't need to tell people how to run their lives or what religious values they have to have. And we don't tell people how they have to spend their money. And I think that is a unifying issue rather than believing that you have to compromise.
Dr. Paul, if Governor Romney wins the primary this Saturday, there'll be 3 for 3 for him. There's going to start to be some pressure on Republicans, among Republicans, to coalesce behind him. So my question for you is, how long do you plan to continue your campaign in the event that he wins again? And is that productive, given how Republicans want so badly to defeat President Obama, if you continue to campaign and challenge him?
Well, of course, he's not going to win the nomination on Saturday. Why should everybody walk away if he wins this primary? You have to wait and see where the delegates are. An election is to get the maximum number of delegates. So yes, I will continue to do it. To think that debate is non-productive, to me, capitulation and going along and being pressured by the establishment leadership, and just say, hey, we don't want any debate, we don't want any rocking the boat, and talking about cutting $1 trillion out of the budget, we don't want to hear that. Well, I might just continue to talk about cutting $1 trillion out of the budget. So I think that's legitimate. I think I have a responsibility. I might confer with my 4 senator friends back here, and I'll ask them for their suggestions on whether we should keep talking about cutting spending rather than capitulate and say, oh, it looks like so-and-so is going to win, so we better not discuss the issues anymore.
We've got time for one more, please.
Congressman, in this state, some districts, some of these counties that these senators are from, unemployment is 2 and 3 points higher than the national average, some of the slowest growing job sectors in the country. Can you talk to South Carolina voters who might be voting for you Saturday about jobs and bringing them to the state?
Well, of course, there's 2 sets of factors when you talk about a state versus the national economy, because a state has to suffer the bad consequences of a national economy, and I can talk a lot about that. I don't know all the details of the state, whether the state has an obligation to change their tax code, reduce their regulations. I know it's a right to work state, and that is great, and I think that has to be protected. But overall, in the economy, to get the whole economy growing, we have to understand the business cycle. We have to understand where the bubbles came from. We have to understand the proper role of government when the bubble bursts. And we don't understand that. Our government doesn't, because instead of the liquidation of debt and all the malinvestment and bad mistakes made, in the last 4 years, all we have done is prop up the bad debt. So that prolongs the agony. It doesn't address the subject. So the housing bubble has burst, but it hasn't been cleansed because the government is still involved. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac still exists, and the government is involved. They'd like to stimulate housing right now. Who knows? The market might say what we need are prices of houses to go down, lower. But the fact that our government and our Federal Reserve went and bailed out the people who made so much money in the years that bubble was forming, they got into trouble. They went bankrupt. But the people ended up owning this bad debt. They did exactly the opposite. So if we want economic growth, we have to look at that business cycle. We have to look at the Federal Reserve. We have to look at interest rates. For instance, one thing the Federal Reserve does is it teaches people not to be self-reliant. So if you're elderly and you have CDs, the Federal Reserve says they don't deserve a market rate of interest. They deserve 1%. And yet they want to take care of themselves and they don't want to gamble in the stock market. So if you had a freer market, they might make more interest, and this would create savings. One fallacy that we have today, which stymies the economy, is that they consider that capital investment comes from the Federal Reserve. It doesn't. It comes from savings. So these are basic fundamental changes. At the national level, we have to drastically change our tax code. Last night I argued the case there was a happier time in this country when we didn't even have a 16th Amendment, and we didn't have an income tax. course, we can't go to that overnight, but we can start thinking about what the role of government ought to be. The role of the federal government ought to be, if there are any burdens on the state governments, they need to be removed so that the states have more leeway to do the job to create the environment. Now, you may have problems here, but let me tell you, I understand businesses will move here and away from states that are damaged by union power and wages being 2 or 3 times higher than they should be. Under those conditions, yes, jobs will come here. There may be some other things that the state can do, but overall, we need to address the subject of debt, cut the spending, balance the budget, have a sound monetary policy, change the tax code, and then the whole country will thrive. And the easiest way to start cutting is talking about all the overseas funding that we do and all the foreign aid and all the involvement overseas. That doesn't even hurt a social program here. I don't think we should start with some of the most vulnerable people who have been taught to be, dependent. But we should cut spending, and that is the big issue. That's been the hallmark of the campaign financially, politically for me, and that is the reason the first year I had proposed to cut the budget by $1 trillion. And thank you very much. Glad you came today.